So good afternoon. This is January the 3rd, 2024, and we are in conversation with the Right Reverend Jennifer Baskerville-Burrows. And she is in her offices at the Diocese of Indiana, and I am in my study in Washington, D.C. And the purpose of this Zoom call is to have an opportunity for the African American Episcopal Historical Collection of the Virginia Theological Seminary and the Historical Society of the Episcopal Church to have the oral history of Bishop Jennifer Baskerville-Burrows. And I'm delighted that you are here with us, Bishop.
It's good to be here.
So what we will do is that I will ask you a few questions. And I'm sure you've done these before, but please don't feel constrained to only stick to the topics that I bring up. And what will happen is that we will have our conversation today, and this recording will go to a transcription service, and they will produce a written transcript. But we will also have the video. And then once it comes to us, we will do a reconciliation of the video and the written transcript, and you will have an opportunity, if you so desire, to go back through it and edit it as you see fit. Most people choose not to, which is very interesting.
Oh, no, I would like to see it.
Okay.
I always review it. Yeah.
All right. All right.
This is the archivist in me, perhaps, who really likes to take care of accuracy and making sure things are as I would want the record to show.
Well, we'll have an opportunity to talk about you as an archivist.
Yeah.
Can we talk about your early life? You were born in New York City.
That's right.
Where?
I was born in Staten Island at a hospital that no longer exists, the Elizabeth Seton Hospital on the North Shore of Staten Island. And then we moved pretty quickly to a couple of places, to North Carolina, where my father was serving in the Marines. We lived on an Army base, a Marine base for a while, and then to Brooklyn, where I spent most of my formative years until I was 10.
Now, was that at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina?
I believe so, but
Okay.
I would have to double check that with my mom.
But you were very young. You were very young.
I was like 2 months old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No memories.
And then, do you have siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother who is 3 years my junior.
I see. And is he a member of the clergy as well?
He is not. He is not. He doesn't have a faith allegiance at the moment.
And when you were growing up in Brooklyn, what school did you go to?
I went to the public school, PS 32 in Boerum Hill, until I was almost through 5th grade. And then in December 16th, 1975, I think it was, we transferred to Staten Island, and I ended up graduating from PS 18 in Staten Island to finish out my 5th grade year. And then we continued to live in Staten Island where my mother and my brother still live. But I went on to go to IS 27, Prahl Junior High School, intermediate school really, and then high school in Manhattan, the High School of Graphic Communication Arts. More than you were asking, but anyway.
No. I'm curious about how most people don't remember the day that they enrolled in a particular school. What makes it so notable that you can actually remember the day and the year?
Because I didn't want to leave my school. We were supposed to go see the Nutcracker performed on that day in Manhattan. And instead we found ourselves moving to a place I didn't want to go to. Yeah. So it's probably, I should let it go after all of these decades, but I can't seem to do it. So.
Was this the New York City Ballet?
Yeah.
You were going to Lincoln Center.
Yeah. And I've not seen it at Lincoln Center yet.
Well, that may be a way of getting you over this thing.
Well, yeah, although except that, I mean, the Nutcracker, like I've seen other performances, but really was the issue was moving to a place I didn't want to be.
Yeah, yeah,
And, you know, as a person who's got a teenager in the house, I understand how difficult moves could be, but
yeah.
it was a rough transition for me.
And
So
how old were you exactly?
I was 10.
10. Oh, just before middle school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and middle school students are crazy. But you weren't,
Yes.
you're right.
No, not me, not at all.
Right.
But I will say, you know, all of the stuff that comes with pre-adolescence, it's a hard time to make a transfer when there are when you're moving from a big world to a smaller one, which is how I would describe the move.
Now, why did you select a school of graphic design?
By the time I was looking at high schools, that I had two things in mind. One was getting out of Staten Island as quickly as I could, but I could not move myself. So I decided that it would be important for me not to go to school in Staten Island because the schools that were zoned for my school district had just I didn't want to be with the people who were there. There were a lot of race riots that would happen every day after school, and I didn't want any part of that. And along the way, junior high school, I had my love of writing nurtured. Was on this, you know, editor of the yearbook and all of those things, school paper. And so I thought journalism would be a really great thing to pursue. And the High School of Graphic Communication Arts had a newspaper journalism program that put out a newspaper every week. And I tested in, and that's where I went.
And did you continue your work on the paper?
Oh
The
yeah,
school
yeah,
paper?
yeah.
Yeah.
Wrote for the school paper and ended up I mean, it's an interesting like detail, but the school was the place where most of the folks running presses and writing the news for the New York Daily News and the New York Times had gone to high school. And so it was this amazing amalgamation between a trade school and a professional development school. And I started out newspaper journalism, but then ended up translating into another major around graphic communications, where I learned how to lay out and prepare in the old-fashioned way
Yeah.
a whole broadsheet for the printing press. I could work a printing press in the most elemental of ways, but I didn't really master color separation and all these other things you needed to know how to do. But I would tell people that I could do everything from write the story to do everything but actually run the press to get something out with what I learned in that school.
Okay, so give me an example. Who was in your class who I would know today?
Oh, I'm not. Carolyn Butts is she writes African Voices. She created that magazine. She was one of my classmates all the way
Wow.
through.
Yeah,
Um, I'm trying to think. A lot of other people might be just on the design
I see.
front, might not be big names, but she would probably be one of the bigger names known out there.
Yeah. And of course, I'll ask the same question when we get you to Smith. Um, and when you were looking at colleges, obviously you had done well in school.
I was salutatorian of my class,
Salute to,
so yeah.
so was I. And you know, I'm still resentful.
Because it was like by half a point or something that I was being
Yes.
valedictorian. Yeah.
You know,
But
and I got no extra credit for advanced placement. None. She took
oh,
home economics courses.
oh,
Yeah,
so what?
well, yeah. And then so I said, Riley, get over it. And I will. Lord help me.
Yeah, see.
Yeah. So why Smith?
By the time I was in college, I shifted out of the journalism notion, but when I was looking at high schools, I mean, looking at colleges while I was in high school, the debate was to go to a professional school like Syracuse University and go to this,
Yeah.
you know, the School of Communications there,
Communications. Yeah.
or to go to a liberal arts college and have a broader education. And, you know, there's these two tracks for journalism folks. But then I thought, because of other things I was involved in around student leadership, I was in my senior year, the president of the Vocational Industrial Clubs of America for New York State, and was traveling around the country doing kinds of leadership things. And so I began to flirt with politics and government, which opened up possibilities around college. And so I thought liberal arts college was the way to go. And because most of my friends were male because the school was majority was, I don't know, it was maybe 60-40 male, female enrollment. For my high school, I thought women's colleges sounded really interesting to me. So I had an intention of applying only to women's colleges, and Smith was one that was brought up to me by my 8th grade English teacher who had gone to Barnard. Always talked to us about, how she was there when she was 16. She was brilliant, Mrs. Horowitz, brilliant English teacher for whom I owe my becoming Episcopalian. So I'll just put a pin in that. But I had heard about Smith, went to visit, and was like, I need to go here. Applied early decision and was on my way. But it was not because my family knew of it or because other students went there. It was because something came in the mail to me that took me in a journey I didn't, hadn't planned on before.
Did you like Northampton?
Oh, I loved it. I still do. I mean, Smith was phenomenal for me and is still a key part of who I am and who I'm friends with and all those things.
Same-sex education, single-sex education. I note for women who have experienced it, a high degree of agency, self-awareness, I would say self-centered, not by any stretch of the imagination, but a well-developed sense of self. Yeah.
No, that was very attractive to me because I think, I don't know, I haven't analyzed it too much lately, but I remember being in high school and being introduced to worlds that I wanted to know more about. And so I was still living in Staten Island, commuting to Manhattan every day, most days. Sometimes I stayed with friends in Manhattan. We had a place where we basically lived for the week, and I'd go home on the weekends because it's an hour and a half. It's a long commute each way.
Did you have to take the ferry?
Oh yeah, the bus, the ferry, and the subway.
Wow.
I'd leave my house at 6 o'clock in the morning and do that. But I would read my grandmother, Mary, who grew up as a sharecropper basically, but lived a few blocks away from us in the housing projects in Staten Island. She would get all these magazine ads and subscriptions. So I would read New Yorker magazine and Newsweek and New York magazine every week in homeroom and dream about these worlds that were not the one I was living in, but I wanted to live in. And Smith and looking at those kinds of opportunities was a way to get there. And so the leadership stuff I got to do because of the leadership club I was a part of really expanded my world. And anyway, there was this yearning to be more out in the world than I had been raised to be in some ways. So Smith was a part of helping me find my voice in an important way.
And then with those magazines, you have a story that's not dissimilar from that of Darren Walker.
Oh, I don't know if I know that.
His mother would come home from her domestic work with magazines from those houses. And that's how he got to know about the world that he wanted to inhabit.
And I think we're probably we're not that far apart in age. And so, it's interesting because there's an education that was given in some of those magazines. And so I was in high school in the early 80s, and it was the rise of the yuppie and the socialite and all these people. And I was living in the housing projects, and I thought, well, look at all this other stuff. And then, of course, I was going to Manhattan, rubbing shoulders with people on the subway, just in the way of going to school in Midtown Manhattan, what have you do. And I had family who lived in other places and traveled the world and things like that. But I just knew that there was an education in reading each week about what was happening around the world that was really crucial. And because of the high school we were at, we were all required to subscribe to the New York Times beginning freshman year. And so, starting in 9th grade, reading the New York Times as a daily practice, because so it was a good thing.
When did tell me about the development of your spiritual life. When did that begin to take an important place in your life?
I don't know. I think I was probably conscious of having a spiritual life when I was around 6 or 7.
How did that manifest?
I just talked to God all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I, um, my family did not go to church
Yeah.
regularly. I had relatives beyond my nuclear family who did, even some who were preachers down south.
Uh-huh.
But I remember being taught to pray the "Now I lay me down to sleep" prayer,
Uh-huh.
and it's
Which I think
somewhere
is
along
frightening, actually.
the worst. I
Ooh.
did not pass that down, but anyway, because we have Compline, like why would I do that? So, but that was the early like learning how to pray and talk to God, and because life at home was often chaotic and not predictable, I found myself talking to God a lot, and that was I don't know. It just was, I don't know, someone told me to do that or something I could do. My grandfather on my mother's side lived with us for a short period of time, and maybe it was a conversation I had with him, but he would get these little these itty bitty Bibles,
Yes.
and I would try to read it as an 8-year-old, which I didn't get really far in Genesis because once I got to the genealogies, like I just lost interest, but I
Yes.
tried
Mhm.
because I thought that was something I should do. And I don't know where I got that from really, but I've always had a spiritual life that I don't have a memory of not having one. But what I wanted to do was to go to church, and that was something I couldn't do anything about until I was a teenager.
And where did you go?
When I was able to go on a regular basis, I went to the AME Zion Church across the street from our apartment building in Staten Island.
Mhm.
And because I could it was directly across the street, so easy to get to, didn't have to, I could do it on my own. I was old enough. My parents were like, sure, that's what you want to do, go on ahead.
Mhm.
And found some community there with friends because all my friends were there
Yeah.
from the neighborhood to the extent that they were friends at the time. I mean,
Mhm.
it's junior high school. But but the spirituality of it didn't really speak to me, but I was able to and willing to overlook a lot that didn't connect with me spiritually for the notion of just being there. So singing in the children's choir and going on the field trips and doing lock-ins and things like that, but not understanding the sermon or the charismatic worship that was part and parcel there, which was, I didn't get it. It was frightening in so many ways, but I was willing to sit with it if it meant being in church. But when the difficulty with being a teenager with the way girls can be sometimes, it was just untenable. So I stopped going, but kept seeking to figure out
And
where I
how did
could.
you keep seeking? What was that
I had
like?
friends who would invite me to church, and I would say, "Okay, I'll go," and then I'd go, and I'm like, "Oh, not that." um, just I would wait for someone to invite me to go along.
Now, when you went away to Smith, you did or did not have a church home.
That's where I started really going to church.
I see.
Yeah, and that gets back to Mrs. Horowitz from
Mhm.
8th grade, who was a his Orthodox Jewish woman who had us read Life with Father, this old play
Mhm.
that is about an Episcopal family. It's a
Yeah, I know the play.
comedy. You know the
Mhm.
play? Yeah,
Yeah.
so I read it. I mean, we all read it as a class.
Mhm.
And because I loved words, I fell in love with words, like catechism and confirmation and all the things that were just like, what are those words? Episcopal. So when I was in my senior year of high school on a leadership training week in Washington, D.C. with other national leaders from, the clubs of different states, all met in Washington. It's really exciting because we got to, offer testimony at the executive office building and meet with senators and all these things. But because, and this is the weirdest thing, Riley, which I really wish I could, folks are passed on now, so I can't ask them, but this was a meeting that wrapped over a Sunday,
Mhm.
right? Which is an odd thing. Like maybe it started on a Thursday and it went to a Wednesday, but it wrapped
Yeah.
over a Sunday because on Sunday morning, they gathered us at some point near Lafayette Square and said, you can go to church, right? There's an Episcopal church over there, there's a Methodist church over there, there's a Presbyterian church over there. Meet back here at 1 o'clock and then we'll go to lunch.
Okay.
They just think about this. This is like the thing that I'm so sorrowful about the world today because in 1983, they let me go off on my own, all by my lonesome. I went to follow the directions, didn't have a GPS, found St. John's Lafayette Square, had a conversion experience, and then vowed that as soon as I got to college, I would start going to church on my own at an Episcopal church. And that was in October. In December, well, and by that time in October, I'd already visited Smith College, and I knew there was a church on campus somewhere. I wasn't sure it was an Episcopal church, but when I got there the following August, in August of '84 to start college, I was like, there's the church. So I had gone into St. John's on the second day I was on campus, I think, and well, not even the second day of campus. I came early for bridge. So by the time I moved into my dorm, my house, it was the beginning of the semester, and St. John's was just down the street, like 2 blocks down. I've signed the guest book. And then the next day, the deacon put a vase of flowers and a welcome note in front of my door.
Oh,
And I was in church the next Sunday, and that
yeah.
became my church.
You know, St. John's Lafayette Square is my parish.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
Oh,
served there as a junior warden and then senior warden, and
oh my gosh.
now I am trying to not be so active in the parish, but I'll be working on the parish Black history.
Oh, well.
And I was also there during the times that Barack Obama and his family would come regularly.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I would sit near him, much to the consternation of Luis Leon, who thought I was stalking the president. Of course, I wasn't. Yeah.
Right.
Now,
John Harper was the rector when I was had that experience.
John Harper. John and I were friends. I wasn't a member of St. John's then. I was at St. Luke's.
Oh, okay.
But John and I were friends even during those times. And it was the home of a lot of activity around the Episcopal Church response to AIDS.
Oh, right. I bet. Well,
yeah.
And I think probably that must have come after me, because this was 1983 and we had just understood what AIDS was.
Yeah.
But that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Now tell me about your experience, your conversion experience.
You know, all I remember is that, and this is the thing that I remembered. This is how I remember it even after it happened, right? Like I just remember being awestruck by feeling like this is where I'm supposed to be. Like God, almost like the heavens didn't open, but like God said, you are home. This is your home. And I remember I had never seen a service like it. And I'd watched church on TV, right? But I had never, I think it was like the powerful, and this is really funny now to me, the power of the liturgy, the procession, the sermon said something to me. I don't remember what it was. I think John Harper preached. It was like, but it made sense. Could be because I was old enough to understand some things, but all of it together had me floating out. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. So when I went to St. John's, Northampton, I ended up going to a parish that felt very much like that and worshiped pretty regularly as a college student. Never went to the student. I didn't even really know there was a student group for, Episcopal students. I just went to church on Sunday because it was right there. And then later, not knowing about baptism or anything, like I was just taking communion and showing up and doing the things, getting really involved in my senior year of college, and finally going to coffee hour and talking to people more and inviting people to church, which I think has something to do with the change that was on the horizon as I was about to graduate. But I remember reading in New York Magazine a profile about Chet Talton, and I kept it in my journal. I pulled it out because I'm like, here's this Episcopal priest, and I go to an Episcopal church, moved back to New York City, found Trinity Wall Street, and then another knockout of liturgy, which is the preference I have for, I prefer a much more Anglo-Catholic style of liturgy generally.
Yeah, I saw that you had this Anglo-Catholic church you were rector of. Were you rector in San Francisco?
No, I was associate priest there.
Associate, swinging the incense.
Yeah, that was All Saints San Francisco, pretty amazing place. But I will say what I needed at the time in 1983 was what St. John's Lafayette Square was giving me. But if I were to choose to go there, like it would not be the place I would choose to go now
Yeah,
because
yeah,
the way liturgy speaks. But right then it was everything. And
yeah.
so whenever I'm in the district, I go by and say a prayer because it will always be sacred space in a particular way.
Oh, how
to me.
wonderful. One
Yeah.
day when we have time, I will share with you the story of the morning of Barack Obama's first inauguration
Oh,
in St. John's Lafayette Square.
oh, I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, yeah. The minister said, everybody around the president-elect, lay your hands on him.
Hmm.
Whew. Anyway, um, when did you decide what you were going to do after Smith? Did you take time off before your urban studies master's degree?
I did. So I graduated in 1988,
Yes.
which was 7 months after the big Black Monday crash of October 1987. And I'm just gonna say this for the record, I had an amazing resume. I worked so hard. I discovered I was an architecture major, urban studies minor, and ended up majoring in architecture because instead of trying to go with government or English, like I loved architecture and I just thought I should study something I love. So did that, interned with the Smithsonian at the Cooper Hewitt Museum and interned with the Municipal Art Society and met Jackie Onassis and did all this amazing work and then could not find a job because nobody could get a job in real estate, architecture, planning, all of that, because the market had fallen out. So, but anyway, I graduated in 88, went back home, ended up temping for Pace University and Corn Ferry, doing just various things,
Yeah.
waiting for the perfect job because I thought I should have a really great job with this resume and experience and hunger I had, but I was competing with people who had master's degrees for answering phones. So that's kind of where it was. But I learned at Smith to do these informational interviews and just started interviewing people. And Lori Beckelman, who was the president or director of the New York City Landmarks Conservancy, passed my resume along to the person who ended up giving me my first job. And I ended up working at the Riverside Park Fund, which is like the Central Park Conservancy, to restore Riverside Park.
Mm-hmm.
And the offices were located in the building, the Interchurch Center up on 120th and Riverside Drive, because the National Council of Churches had moved out.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, I guess they were still there. The Presbyterians had moved to Kentucky and the Baptists had moved out, and there were all of these empty offices. And so we ended up getting some office space. The NCC was still there at the time. And so I ended up finding a job doing preservation work, administrative stuff, but also some program work and grant writing, which I learned how to do. But I got to go to the library with all of the religious books every day and chapel services and speakers from across the world because it was the National Council of Churches. So just going to church and exploring like different ways of doing historic preservation or something like that on my urban planning, regional planning before applying to graduate school, which I ended up, doing 4 years later. So I had a 4-year gap between college and Cornell going to grad school.
I bet you that was wonderful.
The 4 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a rich time. I mean, but hard in the ways in which being poor with everybody, like we all graduated from these fun schools, fancy schools, and then like had no money except for the paralegals. They had money.
Yeah.
The rest of us were just cobbling it together, but we were living as people on their own for the first time. And so there was fun in that. And because I was also starting to go to Trinity Wall Street, like I had this other faith community that was becoming really, really central. And that's kind of where things kind of went not off the rails, but took a detour, I guess, for me in terms of my career path, because I was planning to go to study something around the built environment anyway. And along the way, because of my increasing involvement in the church, was asked to discern ordination, which was not anywhere in my plans.
You say, I want to react to a couple of things, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I too enjoyed studying architectural history and as an undergraduate, because I have to say it changed my life because it
Mm.
taught me to look up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I said, oh my God, there's a whole world up there.
Right.
And it's beautiful.
Well, exactly.
Um, did you consider Trinity Wall Street to be your home parish?
I did. I was baptized there.
You were baptized there.
Right, because I didn't know about like I should be baptized before receiving communion.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
started going, and Elizabeth Sherman, who was one of the priests at the time, was like, I'm starting a class. And I'm like, how do I become a member? And she said, well, this is what you do. You join the commitment to discipleship class, and there's one starting up in a couple of months. And so I did that and was baptized in May of 1989, and confirmed at the same time.
So it is, it helps to, tell me if I'm right, explain why you were there for the institution or installation of the new rector.
Yeah, yeah, that would be it, because it's
And what did you say during that sermon? You said it's a parish church.
yeah,
Oh, I was so moved by that.
yeah, yeah. I
Um,
mean, Trinity is an amazing institution, but for me, it was like church, right?
yeah.
And
I
I
used to
always,
worship there when I was working on at 60 Broad
oh,
for a few
really? When
years.
was that? Was that
Oh
back?
God, it was in the late 70s.
Oh,
And
okay,
I'm
okay.
old. And I would go to Trinity Wall Street for services midday.
Ah,
And I mentioned to Phil Jackson, I said, on Ascension Day, oh my
oh, the
God,
day,
all of the,
the
oh my,
day.
he said, well, that's kind of like our birthday celebration.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is really wonderful. Um, when you say um, that you were becoming more active in the life of the church, and you began to discern the Episcopal ministry, how did that come about specifically?
Well, after I finished the commitment to discipleship class, I started, I mean, I will just say I took preparing for baptism really, really seriously. So because I thought if I'm going to make this choice, I'm going to be sure. So I did, because I was working at the National Council of Churches headquarters in their building, not working for them, but in their building. There was faith conversations all around me. And I remember going to the library and reading about other denominations, and then going to visit other denominations to make sure the Episcopal Church was the one I wanted to be a part of. And then once I was baptized and confirmed, I just thought, well, I need to keep learning. And so I joined the choir. And this is where history is kind of interesting, because I didn't know how new some things were. So there was a woman who was an associate priest at St. John's, Northampton in the mid-'80s. There were women on the altar at Trinity. The hymnal was still new enough in 1988 that I remember them sending me home with these cassette tapes that had snippets of the new music, the new hymns, and I would go home and learn the music because I wanted to be able to sing
Oh,
fully in worship. And so
yeah.
I joined the choir, and then I realized I had all of these friends who were in their 40s who didn't want to hang out with me as much as I wanted to hang out with them, because I was 25 years old, whatever, 23. So I started a young adult group, and Caroline Stacy, who's been at St. Luke in the Fields in Manhattan for a long time, but she was seminarian and then ordained at Trinity, and was given oversight over me and my desires to create a new ministry around young adults. And along the way, she said, you really ought to consider being a priest. Like you should discern that. And I remember saying to her, but I'm going to graduate school for preservation. Like I already have a plan. I know where I'm going. And, but I had obviously had kind of jumped in fully. Like I had my preservation job.
Mhm.
And then I was exploring lots of things professionally with that. But then I was also, again, in the choir, starting new ministries, was going on trips, pilgrimages to England. And so I think she wanted just to make sure I entertained the question, given all the stuff I was doing. And then that just kept opening the world to me. I was hanging out with UBE, going up to St. Philip's Harlem because Chet Talton was there, and I wanted to like understand this whole other part of the church. And so her asking the question, though, sent me into a bit of a detour because I had been so meticulous about what I thought I was called to do, because I had this great resume with all this experience around architecture and preservation and history and urban design, urban studies. Ordination could not be a part of that because God had already, like, see, it's already laid out really clearly here what I'm supposed to do. But here's where God's intervention was so good to me. I had called when I was given this sort of startling thing to consider, I went back to Sherry Poirier, who was the head of the visual part of the art library at Smith College. And she was like a mentor to me, an artist and art librarian.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, Sherry, like, what do I do? Like, I laid it all out for her. And she said, what you need to do is call Arnie Klukas. Arnie, who taught a part of art history section of Western art, was an Episcopal priest. And he was just Professor Klukas, never wore a collar.
Mm-hmm.
But by this time, he was now on faculty at Nashotah House. So I wrote to him because I still write letters, but we wrote letters in those days. And I explained to him my situation. And he said, we'll be praying for you basically as you discern, but you should know about this organization that's a subsidiary of the American Institute of Architects called the Interfaith Forum on Religion, Art, and Architecture, IFRA. And they have a conference coming up in Boston, and you should go. So I saved up my money and I went to Boston on my own to this conference that brought together architects, textile designers, liturgical designers, preservationists, and was like finding all the things I loved all together in one space. So that was like, oh, I don't have to choose. And so I took that back to the discernment committee at Trinity, and I said, okay, here's what's happening with me. And Lloyd Casson, who had been meeting with me, like I hadn't even
I remember
started.
Lloyd. He was at Trinity.
Yeah. He was the man who I met with every month for a year around this discernment.
Yeah.
So Lloyd was like, go off to grad school and like do that and continue in the process, and we'll see how things go. And so off to Cornell I went, and I went to Cornell because Bob Yeager, that was the director of this organization called Partners for Sacred Places. And Partners for Sacred Places was this organization. I'm really involved in it now, but at the time, it was a church, religious property preservation organization. And Bob was co-director with a woman named Diane Cohen. And Diane Cohen was best friends with my boss, Susan Angevin. And so it was like this tiny world. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I should go there and study religious preservation, because if I'm called to be a priest and churches have buildings, I will never not have a job. And at the time, when I was discerning, Lloyd Casson said, you're too young. Go off to grad school because there are too many clergy and you're too young anyway, and you can't guarantee that the church will be able to give you a job full-time for your whole career.
How old were you then?
I was 23.
Oh yeah, well, that's young.
24. I've been baptized.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing when people come to my door now as bishop and they're like, I just became an Episcopalian. I'm like, tell me your story. Like I don't shut the door because you never know, right? So I went off to Cornell, and in the midst of that, Lloyd left Trinity. It was all this, like, everybody was put on hold, and there were 10 of us in the ordination process in one stage or another at Trinity at the time. And so they were like, this Masood Saidullah, who began taking over the care of vocations for us, said, you might want to see whether they'll pick you up in Ithaca, because you don't live here anymore. You live in Ithaca mostly. They will be able to help discern with you. And it was probably a really helpful thing. So when people talk about my relationship with Trinity, they did help me discern ordination, but they did not sponsor me, because I ended up getting sponsored by the Episcopal Church at Cornell.
Yeah.
So that's a whole long story, but
I tell you what will stick with me, I know, from this interview, is the wonderful expression you have. I didn't have to choose.
Yeah.
You know, I can do them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And it's God
what
as
a
my
blessing.
witness.
But it's almost a, you know, I see it conceptually. Tell me if
Uh-huh.
I'm off base, please, as a metaphor for what you experienced when you came to St. John's. The
Oh,
wholeness of it,
yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
necessarily the piece parts, but the experience, the whole experience. And so you
Yeah.
didn't have to pick apart um, historic preservation and put your spiritual life in another basket.
Right. 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 And so, I mean, I think there's yes to all of that. I love the way you describe it because I keep thinking about how do I reflect on my life story in some ways. And what I experienced most days as bishop is this sense of like, I can't believe I get to do this thing, which I felt like 30 years ago, I would not have, I mean, I only had an inkling of, but all I do is help people with their spiritual life in their buildings. Like it's like all this information and experience has come to be so useful and essential to my vocation right now, like this very day. And so I think about that moment of like, oh, I don't have to, like it's not having to choose, not having to be one person here and another person here. I could be my full whole self in both of these spaces. And so yeah, so I went to Cornell and got and did a master's thesis about restoring downtown communities through church revitalization, and finished my thesis, bound it up, sent it to the bookbinders on August 11th, and then
You're amazing.
a week later was in California starting seminary. Like it was just like it was insane in some ways, like only the young, because I'm like, I was untethered. It just
Now,
went
why
from
did you
one.
choose that seminary?
Oh, Church Divinity School, because my chaplain, Gordon Brewster of blessed memory, had gone on sabbatical there and had talked about it. And I had been to California visiting some friends from college and thought, well, if I could have a chance to live in the Bay Area, like, why should I not take it? And Ithaca was so cold and snowy. But it also it felt good. I had the desire to study in a place where I could have some ecumenical engagement.
I
So I
see.
applied to Yale and I applied to CDSP, and CDSP felt like the better fit, and they offered more money, and it was a way of getting me, particularly as folks helped me discern, like I needed to leave the East Coast because there was such an establishment, even though I hadn't been Episcopalian that long, I was so East Coast. I had no idea about what the rest of the country was like and how the church is different.
I mean, look, Trinity, Wall Street, Smith,
I mean,
Cornell. I mean, really.
okay,
Yeah,
so
I get it.
yeah.
Um, where did you do your seminarian training in the Bay Area?
I did my field education at Christ Church, Sausalito. And stop it.
Eking by. Go ahead.
But one of my best friends, my classmates, her husband was the rector. It felt like a really, like, it was all new to me, right? Like Sausalito, I think I knew about it from a song. I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? Like it was just, but it was helpful because I got to understand Sausalito and then Marin City, which is a different part of Marin County. And I got to just be in a world again that was really not like, it was so new agey on the edges of all of that. The Gospel of Thomas book had come out and everybody was like, "Ooh, the Gospel of Thomas." But I'm going, how about the 4 Gospels we already got, right? Like I just had to learn how to be in those spaces. So I did my field education there, but then in my senior year, I didn't have a field education assignment officially. And so I ended up worshiping at St. Augustine's in Oakland for the year. And that became sort of my home base. And
And is that
really,
a predominantly Black church?
it is predominantly historically Black church, one of the 2 at the time in the entire diocese of California. And I really wanted to have an experience of being in a Black congregation. So that was a great place to be home for.
Did it remind you of AME Zion in Brooklyn Or Staten Island? Was it Brooklyn?
At
Yeah.
Staten Island. No, it was in Staten
Staten
Island.
Island, yeah.
No, not really.
Okay.
I mean, it's funny because I ended up visiting St. Paul's AME in
Mhm.
Oakland because
Mhm.
I would have these free Sundays all of a sudden. And I was struck by a couple of things. One, about how similarly our prayer books are. And I'm like, oh, so the things I wonder about, like I should go back to Shiloh, AME Zion in Staten Island and to see like, were they praying with this prayer book? So that by the time I got to the Episcopal Church, it wasn't as foreign as I thought it was.
Yeah.
I don't think they used a prayer book though. I don't remember that. But
No,
anyway,
probably not. Yeah.
yeah. So, but I mean, St. Augustine's was its own thing, really. It was really different. It felt like going to a UBE conference all the time. Catherine Ward was the rector, and
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was.
Would
They
you
sang
describe it as yeasty?
yeasty.
Well, let me tell you what I mean by that. Alive.
Yeah,
Alive.
yeah, yeah,
It's brewing.
yeah. They would sing. There's a sweet, sweet spirit at the
Mhm.
beginning of every single service before the entrance hymn. Like that was the introit, basically. The whole congregation would sing it. And so it was like, oh, I remember the first time I'm like, oh, they're singing it again. I'm like, oh no, this is what they do. This is like no place else does this. This is something else. It was great.
What did you think of seminary?
Oh, I love seminary. Oh
Okay,
my
tell
God.
me. Talk about it.
Well, I feel like I was in that last gasp of traditional residential seminary life in the Episcopal Church. And so I graduated in 97. But I came back to work at CDSP in 2002, and it felt like the whole tide had shifted. But when I was there from 94 to 97, it was the time when people would move their entire families to seminary. People would like change jobs and move their wife and kids or husband and kids. And we all lived there. I lived in the residence halls my first year, ended up moving off campus the second and third years because I didn't want to pay for food I wasn't really eating. So, but I was at chapel 3 times a day, right? Eucharist every day, morning prayer, evening prayer, stuff I can recite in the dark because it formed us as a community and it formed my spirituality in that old, like they wanted to be a monastery kind of thing on the hill. And they kind of did that in a beautiful way. And so that combined with the studies I got to delve into and the friends I made, it was an incredible, magical time. I loved it. I mean, and it wasn't all like easy. Like there was just, people stuff, but for the most part, it was pretty great. I worked in the development office there, did use some of my fundraising grant writing skills, and that was a nice thing. And anyway, can't say too much of only good about it really.
I think about formation in seminary. I describe it sometimes as you go to class, you pick it apart, and then you come back into worship where you put it back together again. Then immediately you go out and pick it apart and come back and put it back together again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty apt description. And I will say I was there in a time when there were 36 of us, I think, in our class, and there were 12 of us who were 35 and younger. And and so there was still some of that. But I had just come from graduate school. And so I was like, I laugh about it now, but I was like, is this what we're doing? Like, because academically, I was used to a whole different vibe, right?
Yeah.
Like the expectations were really different.
Yeah.
And then and it wasn't like they were lax, but it was just like, oh, okay. It's really not only about the academics though. And that was the thing that it took me a semester to figure out, because I remember saying, I would be writing better paper or like longer papers if I wasn't having to go to chapel every 5 minutes. And then by the time I got to the spring semester, my junior year, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, this is what it's about. Like integrate. And yeah. It's a really different kind of thing. And so there's a loss for me when I think about now as I'm helping new postulants make decisions about seminary, and some of them are going away, some of them are staying with, and doing the distance thing. And I'm just like, if it's at all possible to get up and move to a place, do it, because you need to learn to live in community in a different way that is more than about just the book and the paper.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And the ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What so you began your life as an Episcopal priest in California.
No, I was ordained in Central New York and was brought back to the East Coast. And so the thing about that was hard about going to school in California was that I thought I'd like to stay there. But David Jocelyn, who passed away this earlier last year, he said, you know, we picked you up to go to seminary. You might want to come back here. So I was like, yes.
Yeah.
So I came back to the East Coast, to upstate New York, and was ordained deacon and priest out of Central New York.
Yeah, it does say that. But I was wondering, oh, that didn't happen until 02 to 04
Yeah, then
when
I
you
came
went
back
back out
that.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, progressive Anglo-Catholic is described.
Oh, at all times. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And I went
so
there, you know,
your return to New York was intentional and purposeful. Yeah.
yeah. They had a job for me. You know, they had curates positions. And so I had to interview at a couple of places. I wanted to be on the lake in Skaneateles, but ended up getting called to St. Paul's in Endicott, this blue collar parish outside of Binghamton. And oh man, it was wonderful and hard in all the ways because I was a single 31-year-old Black woman in a town that was almost like 95% white, and congregation that had three other Black people, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh, but I went back, and then when I was offered a position, I mean, when it was like almost 2 years over, like I needed to find a new position. That's when I went down to Morristown because it was closer to New York City and it was the right call. It was a great fit. Loved it.
Yeah, Morristown is a lovely town.
Oh my gosh. And St. Peter's, Morristown at the time was just amazing. It was an amazing time to be there.
I think I know a family who were communicants at St. Peter's, and I think they were the Kirbys.
Oh my
Jack
gosh.
Kirby?
Yeah. It's just my gosh, I got the memory right. A fairly large family. I think there were like 4 or 5 kids. He had a hobby farm.
Mhm.
They were lovely. In fact, the story I remember, I don't remember their names, but I remember his wife having maybe the 4th child and was in church like 2 days later. So I'm giving communion to her, and she's got this baby who is not even a week old. And they were so faithful. I mean, just so wonderful. Anyway.
Well, you know that his uncle, who was his mother's brother, his mother's name was Walker Kirby. And her brother went to VTS.
Oh,
Was an
no.
Episcopal priest. Uncle Spotswood.
Gosh.
Uncle Spotswood. It wasn't Kirby, Uncle Spotswood, Dillard. Spotswood Dillard. And he was there at the time that the seminary was integrated.
Oh my God.
Walker. Now, I know the Kirbys because we were both associated with Lafayette College, which is where they bankrolled lots of stuff there. And I was a trustee there, an alumnus, but also a trustee there for many years.
What a small world.
It's a small world.
Oh my gosh. That is wild. I'm gonna have to, I still have my directory from St. Peter's at that time. I have to go back and look through it. So anyway.
And somebody, the sister of somebody, or the brother of somebody, famous actor or something, was the rector there for a while.
Oh yeah, Janet Broderick.
Yeah. Matthew Broderick's sister
was the rector who followed Zach Fleetwood, and I worked for Zach Fleetwood, but yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, I preached at the institution of a friend of mine from seminary who became the rector of Calvary and Summit.
Oh, I just saw that on Facebook.
Yeah. Chris Cole. Yeah. I appreciate
Because that whole Route 24, I mean, so being there and like all the associates, we'd get together every month. We had a
Yeah.
really great community. I mean, so I'd go down, we'd meet at Calvary. Sometimes we'd go down to Short Hills. I mean, we would sort of hip hop along the route.
Those New Jersey towns,
Yeah.
one right after the other. And you liked being in Morristown, obviously.
Oh my God, I love Morristown.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great community to be in. My cousin Jonathan had lived there back when I was living in Staten, like between grad school and seminary. So I would hang out there from time to time. So I kind of knew it, but I didn't really know it until I moved there. And it was a beautiful 3.5 years. But I will say what brought me, I mean, looking for the next thing, going on my 4th year, it was kind of time to begin looking at the next call. I wasn't a curate, so I could have stayed longer, but just seemed to be a good time to start looking. And had interviewed at various churches around the country, and nothing was quite right. 9/11 happened, and I was like, I need to go. And the person I worked for at DSP, the development office, Rick Felton, said, I have a position open. Would you like to be the director of alum and church relations? And I said, yes. Moved right back across the country because being in the East Coast, so close to New York City in the wake of 9/11 was just too hard for me. And so
Can you explain to me what happened with you and Rowan Williams on 9/11?
Well, because of my relationship with Trinity, I continued to do all kinds of things over the years. Like it still was home. And so I was involved in lots of things. And there was an invitation because of work I was doing with their spiritual formation programming. They were doing these spirituality conferences. Ann Windsor, who was the associate priest at the time, and she was my spiritual director in California. So I had all these connections. She said, where I got an invitation to come to this taping of kind of a forum with the soon-to-be Archbishop of Canterbury. So I'm like, great, I'm right over in Morristown. I'll be right over. I can do that. And here's what I remember about that whole weekend. I had gone to the US Open with good friends of mine, Danielle Baker, who's now a priest, but she was the vestry person at St. Peter's at the time.
I was at that Open.
So this was the night, though, that this was September 9th, and Serena and Venus played in the finals for the first time. And it was like a magical night, right? All of this amazing, like, goodness. And I used to play tennis, and so I was all in. Then Monday came, and then I got up on Tuesday morning and went into Manhattan, and then the day unfolded. And I just remember so much about that whole experience. But one of the memories I had while I was in the stairwell, thinking I was going to die, thinking I just had this most amazing, like this life that I had wanted to have, actually I got to have. Right? Like I had all these experiences, and that if I was going to die, then this would be like, I'm ready. Now, I don't want to die. I think about death all the time. I mean, it always feels like I can't believe I live another day because like of God's grace, there's so many ways to die early, die young, unprepared, all those things. But I remember on that day with the priest who had baptized me, J.B. Calloway was there, and we were in the stairwell, and I thought, okay, the place where I got new life, maybe the place where I leave it, and but there was this series of days that led up to that where I felt like life has never been better, and then I thought it was going to be over. So I have been grateful for every day since.
Have you written about that?
Not extensively. No.
Can we put a pin in that for a second?
Yeah.
Well, we'll get back to that because you are a writer.
Yeah.
You speak as a writer. And of course, you're very good friends with a writer friend of mine, Alelia Bundles.
Oh my God. Yes,
how do you know Alelia?
Well, because I'm in Indianapolis. And we have a church off of Indiana Avenue, and she and I serve on the board of the Indiana Landmarks and other kinds of things. We do a lot together, but I mean, talk about amazing to be mentioned in her company is a blessing indeed. But,
absolutely.
So, but you're right. I mean, I've been asked to write my story, like my, something. I talk to church publishing all the time, and I'm like, I've gotta commit to it. And I just haven't done that. But
Well, because and I hope you will consider at some point what you want to do with your papers. Now, I know when you are a bishop, you have obligations to your own diocese. A diocesan bishop, you have obligations to your own diocese. But there's also an archive that would love to have your papers. People will be writing about you for generations. And it seems to me that I hope you will consider, with that knowledge, that I hope you will consider a professional repository of your papers and effects. And that's my only advertisement I will do today. Now, when did it occur to you that you might become a bishop?
I mean, not that long ago, honestly. I mean, so because here's the thing, the way discernment sometimes works. Like people would ask me to think about, like they would say as a compliment, I think. I saw it probably more, I heard it as a compliment unless we actually see some things in you. We don't say this to everybody, but people would say, oh, you should be a bishop. You make a great bishop one day. And I would be like, I haven't done anything. Like this is back in the early 2000s, right? And I don't know, I was doing a lot of things around the church-wide, and but it didn't seem like why would someone say that to me? I was just trying to be like, I hadn't even been a rector, I think, the first time someone had said that to me. So I just thought, okay, well, thank you. And then I remember putting my name in for Bishop of Rochester in 2006. This is before the election that brought Prince Singh to Rochester. And I'd been a rector at that point for a few years, and didn't get past the first step, right? And I thought, okay, well, I'm good. Like I got a lot that I get to do. And at that point I was rector in Syracuse and chaplain at the university, and had this food blog, this whole life as a food writer to augment the church life, because that wasn't keeping me busy enough or something. But because I love to write, so I was writing every day, this food blog, and then food magazine. But I just thought, maybe, but I'm too busy like trying to do this basic ministry. And then in 2016, things began to shift. And part of that was because I was called to be on the staff in Chicago and working with Bishop Jeff Lee. And I got to see what a bishop actually did day to day, being on his executive team. And that's when I began to think, well, maybe, but it would still be another 4 years before I would think about it seriously. And because I got to understand that it really needed to be the right place, not any place.
Yes.
I didn't really seriously think about it until, I don't know, the series of openings that happened all in one short period of time. I think the Diocese of Central New York announced that there was going to be a transition, and someone had called me, and I thought, I love Central New York, but I could never go back there. I'm not that to even look at that. And then Western North Carolina became open, and I thought, well, my mom's people are from Western North Carolina. I would go there in a heartbeat. And I remember looking at the profile going, I think I might want to, maybe pursue that. But then it wasn't like, I didn't do anything about it. And then Indianapolis came open and people began to call me. And then I thought, okay, like, I don't know anything about Indiana. I'd been there a few times. I have no reason to be in Indiana. But I read the profile, but I remember Gail Greenwell, who used to be the dean in Cincinnati. She sat me down at a Credo conference for the faculty and said, could you just look at the profile? Like, just, show me I'm thinking you should put your name in here. At the very least you could do is read it. And I remember reading it and thinking, oh my God, this has my name all over it.
Mhm.
And getting myself together, like, because I've been blessed in so many ways of not having to use the OTM situation, the Office of Transition Ministries, to find
Mhm.
positions. I barely kept that updated. I kind of kept my resume updated because I learned how to do that in high school, but I had to turn a whole bunch of stuff around to quickly to get things in the day before the deadline. And, and then, here we are. But it really was this sense of, I'm not sure if I'm called, there's nothing that feels like it's worth the effort of applying. And then I saw the thing that made me think, well, this is the craziest notion, because Indiana does not have anything to do with me, except that this profile as it's written is like calling my name as loudly as anything I've heard in a long time. So
So you felt called.
I did. Yeah.
And when did the awareness that if it all panned out, that you would be the first Black woman diocesan bishop?
I will say the Gray Lassane, who's now the dean of the cathedral here in Indianapolis, he was on the search committee. I remember being on the discernment retreat and walking the labyrinth. We had this quiet time before the very end of the discernment retreat weekend for the candidates. And he said, if you're elected, you would be the first Black woman. I mean, I think I kind of knew it, but no one ever said it out loud. So he said,
Yeah.
he's voiced it out loud. And he said, Indiana, with all of its racist history, is this crazy place in so many ways, but I think we could do it. And I was like, what? And at this point, like, all I had seen was like the retreat center, the DePaul Center where we had our discernment retreat. I'd been to Indianapolis a couple of times. So, but I just kind of sat with that and thought, oh, okay. Like, could it be a real thing? And I think as I went through the walkabouts, there was this real clarity that I got, because I thought, even up until I arrived for the meet and greet walkabout period in October before the election, I thought, I feel like this could be a call, but I'm not sure. And if it's not, like, I love my life in Chicago. I have a great situation here. Like, I'll be good. And by the time I finished that week of visiting all around the diocese, I thought, if I'm not elected, I will be heartbroken. Like, I can't, like, how could they not? Because I see it so clearly. It felt so good. And then I thought, oh, I really do want this. Like, I think I do feel it. Like, I was like this suspension of belief for a long time. And yet I was still surprised when it happened, because I don't know what I thought. I thought it would take a long time. And I thought there are these incredible other people on the slate, and surely they would be elected, because, I don't know why. I thought a lot of things, but I just think I didn't think it would be me. I didn't think it would be that quickly. So the story of me getting the call as I was driving from picking up a race bib at a race expo, they're going to run a race that weekend, and they elected really quickly. I was not ready. I was not prepared for it, and it was an amazing moment.
But you had already begun your relationship with your maker many years before.
Mm-hmm.
When you said to me at the beginning of this conversation, you've been talking to God all your life.
Yeah.
I was drawn to that and thought immediately, and I haven't seen this movie, and I don't think I will, because I think movies of books that I love
Mm-hmm.
fool around with my perception and my memory of the text, The Color Purple,
Oh, yeah.
and Seeley's communications to God.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was reminded of that when you talked about it as a girl. You talked to
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
and their God was there with you when you were elected bishop.
Yeah.
How do you find it?
Being bishop,
Mhm.
um, I can say I feel like this is what I was called to do. Like I
Yeah.
really, there are hard days and certainly hard moments in the days, but I feel like this is what, I mean, all the things that I've done in my life have led me to be in exactly the right place, doing exactly the stuff I've been called to do. And so I really love it. Even the heartbreaking hard parts of it are like, okay, like I'd rather not be doing some of these things. But if I like there's parts of whatever work I've always had that were not the most fun or the sort of regrettable parts of the work that does need to be done. And so there's that, but it's far outweighed by the ability to be a pastor to a community in ways that I feel like the church can really show up for itself to be. And so I feel like I get to be, I don't know, in people's lives in a really incredible way. And it's a privilege I don't ever take for granted. And I really enjoy it.
Um, no regrets?
No, no regrets. And because, and so here's the other thing about it too, Riley, like this whole preservation piece, which, all throughout the time I was serving in these churches, I was writing articles on preservation. I was restoring, I had consultant, little consultant thing that I did where I helped people restore their buildings and did the historical research. And I wrote articles and helped design programs and sat on boards, and did all of this stuff, steady, steady, steady. But now as bishop with all of these buildings in my care, I get to actually move some levers of change in a time when there's real difficulty about decline in membership and all of these buildings that we have. And so this thesis that I wrote in 1994, I get to actually say, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Let's do something. Like, let's bring it to life. And so I'm actually getting to try to be a part of neighborhood revitalization through our churches. And that's why
Ooh.
Amelia and I are in a relationship, because we have a church in the neighborhood that that's got, some development possibilities, and to do it in a way that is, and to do that kind of development in ways that helps to service the church and the community, and to
Yeah.
do some reparations work, really trying to help
Yeah.
shift and make right a thing that had been wrong, and to do it with buildings and faith leaders and community leaders. So all the stuff that I've loved to do, I get to do as part of my everyday work. It's a phenomenal thing. And the people who I started working with around this 30 years ago are still in my life. And so I feel like I've grown up as an adult and as a pastor, priest, bishop, as a preservationist with a community of people, that makes my life feel really cohesive, and like it makes sense to me.
How do you feel? Let's see, I noticed that there is talk, more than talk. There is discernment.
Mhm.
Episcopalians love that word. There's discernment about joining, Southern Indiana and Northern
No,
Indiana and the
yeah.
Diocese of Indiana. Um, how do you see that turning out?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
What I say is that it's because it's been a question that's been sitting around for decades. And, we were once one diocese, and so this would be reunifying. And having walked with Chicago through reunifying, a part of their diocese was bringing in Quincy into the Diocese of Chicago. I think, that was not wasted experience, but this question was here before I got here. And Bishop Doug Sparks and I have been working together since day one, and we thought we need to ask the question faithfully and then either do it or say it's not the right time. But it feels like if we're going to entertain the possibility, this is the moment to do it. So we'll see. I believe in reconciliation. I think there's a lot to be gained by doing it, but if it's not the right time, then I want us to be able to have discerned that well, and not just be an opportunity missed or someone's decision made because of no other choices to be made.
So you have what, 48 parishes, 49,
Mhm.
48,
At 48. Mhm.
48? That's a lot. No?
Yeah, I mean, it's just right for me. It's not, we're not that large numerically. I have a lot of bishop friends who have Bishop Body Perry in Michigan, 78 churches, Southern Ohio, 70-something churches, one bishop. So, the geography might be a little bit different, but if we were to unify, and Indiana's not that big a state, I think, well, we'd figure it out. But those details are we can, at the level of making these discernments, get caught up in those details that are interesting and necessary in some ways, but are not the most important details. How will you visit everybody? Well, we can figure that out. The point is, do we actually want to be committed to being back together again after generations of not having been together and being a new thing? And the things that keep me up at night as I think about the discernment of reunification is all the things I loved about the Diocese of Indianapolis that I felt called to serve and to help amplify. I have to hold it lightly. Like, God may be calling us into a whole different reality, which means learning to love perhaps a different thing.
Yeah.
And which is, I think, such a faith question. Because we're asked that all the time, how to love a thing that's not us, that's different, because God has put it in front of us and has called us to be people who love as God loves and who reconciles as God reconciles, and all those things. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Now, I have to tell you that whenever, and I know you're going to roll your eyes, please don't do it.
Okay.
That whenever people talk about the next presiding bishop, your name is always on the short list, but you're aware of that.
I am. And, I serve on the presiding bishops, on the committee to nominate the next presiding bishop, just because I wanted to reduce anxiety about that. I really feel called to be here. And the other thing we haven't talked much about, which is a whole nother piece of the story, is my call as a wife and mother. And my son is 13 years old. And one of the reasons why I almost did not say yes to discerning Indianapolis was because at the time, Timothy was 5. And I was thinking, as Black men were getting shot left and right, I thought, how am I going to be a mom and be a bishop? Like, that doesn't work, except in places where I can make it work, which is where I've been able to do that here. And there was just no way, I think, if the call of the gifts might have been there to be presiding bishop in this time, my call to be a mom is not compatible with that.
The good news is that age 13 doesn't last long.
Well, yeah, well, that's not both good and bad. Like,
because God is merciful.
Yes, exactly.
Now, but I'm glad and I'm reassured that your response to me was not, absolutely not. So I'm very pleased about that. What is your marathon PR?
Oh, I've only done one marathon.
Which one?
So I guess it's a PR. It was the virtual Boston in 2021. And I think it was like because it's such a miserable time for me, but it's like 6.5 hours and change. It was a long slog of a day. I was doing great until mile 20, which is when apparently it always breaks down for people.
Yeah. I used to many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I did 5. That's enough.
That's good. Yeah.
That's enough.
I often think maybe one more, but no time soon.
It takes such preparation.
Well, this is the thing.
Right. And I would say to people, the real achievement in running a marathon is having the confidence to get to the starting line.
That's right. So in 2021, we were still mostly on lockdown. I could train and do these 2.5-hour training runs because I had my staff and we did it together, and it was great. We would work out all the problems of COVID and run. And we had time, like after the run, I could go back home and maybe do a Zoom call and be done, right? I'm thinking, I don't have the time to train like that, because I'm a slow runner. I would need that amount of time.
Yeah.
So but running is still a passion, and I'll be back in Boston for the 5K right before the marathon, and doing some things around marathon weekend in April, and some of the key races like 10 milers on the calendar later in the year.
What are you reading now?
Oh, well, I just finished reading Tom Lake by Ann Patchett, and I just love her. Talk about a writer's. Oh,
By the way,
anyway.
you know that my friend Kenny Leon, you know who Kenny is?
I
He
don't think so.
directed Top Dog, Underdog on Broadway,
Oh,
Ellen Victorious. He and I started a theater company in Atlanta together, the True Colors
Oh my
Theater
word.
Company. And so he's doing all this stuff on Broadway. He became August Wilson's director of choice. But next season on Broadway, he's directing Our Town.
Okay.
I am so
I'm
excited.
gonna
I don't
have
know
to
what
come
to
back and see that. Because I'll tell you, oh man, this is a whole nother conversation. So thank you for mentioning that. I will track on that for sure.
Okay.
And going to high school, my high school was in the theater district. And so, and my cousin Priscilla, who used to do opera and Broadway, was like in the 80s. I have this love of New York City theater that I don't get to indulge very often. So
Yeah.
I'm going to have to check that out. But I just started reading is it The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride? I just started it yesterday, and I can't wait to get home so I can pick it up again. It is so good. So
I haven't read it yet, and I have, but I listened to some interviews. So it's there, on behind me, in the pile, ready to go.
Yeah, well,
I love listening to him talk about it.
Oh, I have to look at some of those interviews when I'm driving around, because I have not read his work before. I've always wanted to, and I thought, you know what, and now that I've picked it up, I'm going, oh my God, thank God there's more to discover. So I'm loving it so far.
I'm loving that we have so many wonderful Black writers. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, what an embarrassment of riches.
Oh yeah.
I mean, really. All right, I know your schedule. You only have 5 minutes left. Now, let me ask you this question. And I always ask the question. I consider these oral histories to be about you. In most cases, particularly clergy, fully expect inquiry into larger issues. Institutional issues is what I mean by larger issues. And so I say that to you as a reason, as an answer to the unasked question about why we didn't talk about it. But also, I use this as an opportunity to ask you, was there anything that you wanted and expected me to ask you and to talk about that we did not talk about?
Okay, so how should I enter first? I think there's probably some things I should say, because I feel there's a great debt of maybe just a great debt that I owe to a number of Black women, particularly, who've helped raise me up in ministry. I'm thinking of Nan Pete, particularly, who having served in Indianapolis, it's crazy how this all just keeps coming right back around. But she was at Trinity Wall Street, and I remember thinking the great Nan Pete wanted to talk to me, and I could not, I couldn't even return her calls. I was like, she's just being nice. And she was like, call me back. Anyway, she's been an amazing mentor. Nell Braxton Gibson, from just amazing lay leader. Bishop Barbara Harris, of course, has been an icon and idol. Gail Harris. I mean, they're just these women who have helped me be here. And I would not want to have an oral history exist in the world without me naming a few of them.
Thank you.
Good.
Anything else that you wanted to discuss?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I thought this is a lot of time, but it's a lot of living.
It goes fast.
So it went by so fast.
It goes by fast. Now, let me ask you another question. If you were not going to be a bishop or a member of the Episcopal clergy or active in the church, what do you think your life would be like? Would you have pursued a separate course, not the fully integrated course that you have done, but a separate course in urban design and neighborhood revitalization and what do you call the built world?
Yeah, I think that's probably how it would have gone. I think about that all the time, because I met my husband at my ordination to the priesthood, I'm like, well, how would I have gotten married? Like all of these things I would have gone a really different way. But I think I probably would have graduated from grad school and got a job maybe going back to Philadelphia to work for Partners in Sacred Places and pursued that more intensively. And I can't even imagine where I would be living. Like, would I've ever gone to California? There are all of those questions. But I would hope that I would have, like, things would have worked out. I would have a life doing something I loved. I would be active on a church vestry somewhere, doing the things singing in a choir, like all the things I was doing before seminary. And
I would discourage you from being a vestry person.
well, I was on the congregational council, the parish level vestry at Trinity for a couple of years, and yeah, I mean, but once you know, right? So
yeah. So you know Eric Eve.
Who?
Eric Eve.
Eve.
Trinity Wall Street. No, he's probably behind you. He's probably after you.
Yeah.
He's after you.
It's funny because I know some Eves I went to college with. Licia Eve.
That's his sister.
What?
Yes. Licia
Okay.
Eve's father. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Attica.
Right.
Yeah. Her brother, Eric, was a member of the vestry at Trinity Wall Street.
I'm gonna have to ask Phil Jackson about that. Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah. But when I asked Phil about it, he just he brightened.
So
yeah,
let me just
Alicia Eve, right.
This is one of those like crazy Episcopal stories, but I'll end with this because I know we could talk forever. So Licia Eve was 3 years ahead of me at Smith.
Yeah.
And I idolized her so
Wow.
much. She was like the glamorous, put together, popular Black woman I always wanted to be, but was not really, right? Like it just like, oh my gosh, she's amazing. So she graduates. I go off and do my life. And I would see her pop up in the Smith Quarterly every now and again. And I kind of like, because she was still, I think, in New York. I think she went back to Buffalo and I was in Syracuse. And I think I was at some event, but didn't see her. So the presiding bishop, Michael Curry, is getting installed. And I'm sitting in a row at the National Cathedral. And I turn behind me and there she is. And I was like, I lost my mind. Because this is now almost 40 years later, right? Like we were in school, like she graduated, I think in 85 or 86. And now it's 2016. And there she is. And I just lost it. And I was so great. And it was as if, she was just gracious and wonderful. And
like the years never happened.
So beautiful. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyway, like her family, because they would be in the news every now and again from like the upstate New York news. And so to find that her brother is connected with Trinity, it's just like another, like, of course.
Now she almost became a lieutenant governor.
That's right.
Under David Patterson.
That's right.
Amazing story.
Yeah.
Speaking of amazing stories, you have an amazing story. Now, I have to tell you what's really frustrating about this session. We didn't have enough time. I'm sorry.
Well,
but
I appreciate the time you've had, though. It's been great.
All right, fine. I'm not going to bother you again yet, but I may be back.
Okay.
Is that all right?
That would be more than all right.
Okay.
Really.
Terrific.
You're a great interviewer, and it's been easy, and I've enjoyed this time.
Oh, I've enjoyed it too. Thank you so much. And and let me tell you something. Any friend of Aletheia Bundles is a friend of mine.
Well, I will be happy to tell her that we've had this time. And when I come, I'll be back at VTS for something. I don't know. There's always something. And I will make sure to let you know I'm coming.
Please. And you have to come down to the basement of the library.
Oh, yeah.
to the
Definitely.
archive, because
I would
that's
love
where
to.
I hang out, and you will love it.
I know I will. I
All
know I
right. All right. Thank you so much, Bishop. Have a
will.
wonderful day.
Thank you.
You've been
You
so
too.
generous. I'm very grateful to you and to God. Bye-bye.
You take good care. Take care. Bye.